Would you like to become a podcaster just like yours truly? Then go to howtopodcastbetterthananyone.teachable.com and sign up. Thanks. David Wayne Waggoner was a 23-year-old from Pasadena, Texas. He had been in the Marines and was a quiet kind of guy. Sometime in early October 1971, David went for a spin on his motorcycle. Although the bike was found, David never returned. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. There was a statistic at one point in Unfound's existence, early on, where 10% of the disappearances we covered, where foul play was suspected, they could be connected to a person in law enforcement. That yes, people in charge of protecting you and me could be the instigators of disappearances. I know, it's a horrible percentage and idea. Luckily, and for whatever reason, as Unfound has featured more disappearances, we're up to about 300 now, that stat has dropped over the last couple of years. Unfound hasn't covered as many cases with a law enforcement connection as it did in the first couple of years. Why? I don't know. If you're wondering what some of those early episodes are, Kelly Rothwell, Robin Abrams, of course, and Jennifer Wilkerson. Well, with the disappearance of David Waggoner, we add another case to that statistic, at least theoretically. Of course, you, the audience, will get to decide what happened, foul play or not, to this Easy Rider. And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Linez's website, CHARLEYproject.org. David Waggoner wasn't the stereotype of a guy who any of us would think would have ended up in the Marines, especially in the 1960s. He was quiet, kind of bookish. Not to mention, David's older brother was in the Army. Yet, that is what David chose. He enlisted. He was not drafted. He spent 4 years as a rocket launcher. Surprisingly, David never went to Vietnam. In fact, he never even left the United States. Getting out of the Marines in 1969, David got a good job. But his family said he seemed bored, and David quit that job not long before disappearing. He had no girlfriend or children. So, on October 9th, 1971, David's family realized they hadn't heard from him for a few days. Upon arriving at his Pasadena apartment where he lived alone, his mother and sister found his car there, but his motorcycle gone. The scene appeared as though David left by his own choice and simply didn't return. 2 weeks later, someone found David's motorcycle an hour away, parked on the edge of the Sam Houston National Forest. It had gas in it and had no mechanical issues. A search by the San Jacinto Sheriff's Office found no other signs of David. He was never seen again. Over 10 years would pass before David's disappearance came back into the spotlight due to corruption and violence by that same sheriff and his deputies. This was then followed by a movie about them in the late 1980s. Why have police officers, more than any other profession, been theoretically connected to so many disappearances that Unfound is covered? Whether the percentage is 10 or 7 or 5%? I don't know. But please contemplate that as you try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1. Should we or should we not jump to conclusions given that David's gun is also missing? Number 2, how truly unusual is it that David's family still does not know the identity of the hunter who allegedly found David's motorcycle? And number 3, really, how weird are the San Jacinto County disappearance statistics? A topic I will cover in depth after the interview. David's family is ecstatic that his disappearance is finally being covered in depth in the 21st century, and they cannot escape the idea that foul play occurred. The guest for this episode is David's sister, Diana Sherbet. Unfound news. Alan Glasgow, a missing man from Arkansas who was featured on Unfound just 6 weeks ago, has been found alive. Authorities tracked him down, and he told them he wants nothing to do with his family and friends anymore. Unbelievably, this is the 4th disappearance that Unfound has covered this year that has been resolved. Next, the June 23rd episode, that would be next Friday's episode, will be in 2 parts due to the length of the interview. They will be released at the same time. But I didn't want anyone to be confused upon getting to the end of part 1 and thinking I messed up or something. Finally, please do not forget I host another podcast on this app you're on right now. It's called Unfound Live. I analyze recent disappearances, murders, UFO sightings, and even my favorite karaoke songs. Please subscribe now. Thanks. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the sister of David Waggoner, Diana Sherbet. Diana, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. I really do.
And I appreciate you for appearing. Thanks. Let's start here. Let's just talk about the Waggoner family. Of course, you are David's sister. We had just talked about before we started this recording that you have some siblings kind of separated in age. Why don't we just start there, Diana? Just talking a little bit about the family, your siblings. Describe your family, the Waggoners.
Okay. Well, I had there were 4 of us, and it was actually like 2 families. I had a sister that was 14 years older than me, and a brother that was 8 years older than me. And then I came along, and then 16 months later, my brother David was born. I was born in 46. He was born in 47. My mom and dad were originally, they were from Nebraska. And during the Depression, my sister was born in Nebraska. And then during the Depression, my dad had an uncle in Chicago that was a doctor, and my dad couldn't find work. He grew up on a farm, and he couldn't find work there. And so his uncle said, if you'll move to Chicago, you definitely will find work. So we moved. Well, they moved. I wasn't born yet. We moved to Chicago, and then my oldest brother, Charles, was born. Mm-hmm. And then I was born in 46, and David was born in 47.
Wow.
Of course, I have no memory of living there. And I was 4 years old. We moved to Corpus Christi. My mother had a sister that had gotten married, and her husband knew Corpus. I'm not sure all the details, but anyway, they lived in Corpus, and they were telling my mom and dad how nice Corpus was. So we moved, and I'm so thankful for that because I would not have wanted to grow up in Chicago. My sister did. She graduated from high school there.
Huh.
And in fact, she got married in Chicago. But anyway, so we moved to Corpus, and I believe I was around 7 years old, and Of course, it was my oldest brother and me and David. We're still living at home. We moved to Washington State for a couple years. My dad was a pipe fitter, and we moved up there because of work for him. And we lived there for 2 years, and then we moved to Rockport. I was in the 4th grade, and David was in the 3rd grade when we moved here. And it was our home until we both we graduated from high school. And then when he graduated from high school in 1966, he joined the Marine Corps. Of course, that was during the Vietnam War. My oldest brother was in the Army, and in fact, my oldest brother joined the Army in 1957 as soon as he graduated from high school. And he went to Vietnam. My oldest brother went to Vietnam twice. David did not. He wanted to, but I guess they thought they could use him more here. He actually, I believe, was a missile launcher was his title. And then David got out of, before he got out of the Marine Corps.
Let me jump in. I don't want to go over some of these things, Diana. Let's just go back a little bit, just to get maybe know your family a little bit better. The Waggoners, kind of just maybe a little more personality into all of this. The Waggoner family, life of the party type of family. Laid back, kind of the strong, silent type. How would you describe your family as a whole, personality, dynamics?
That is, it's going to be hard to describe. My mother was very quiet. My dad was not. My dad was an alcoholic.
Oh.
And we never knew. He would go and drink at a beer joint here in Rockport, and he would come home, and sometimes he'd be in a good mood, and then other times he wouldn't be in such a good mood. So David and I were pretty quiet. We tried to stay out of his way.
Wow.
My dad, he was pretty demanding.
I see.
We really didn't have a loving home.
Okay.
I really have tried over the years to try to remember if my mom and dad told me they loved me, and I honestly cannot remember that.
Wow.
They did, as I got out of school and got married, then, they would say that, but I don't honestly remember that. We did not have a loving home, and David was very quiet. He read science fiction books a lot. He kind of stayed to himself growing up, where I got out of the house as much as I could and ran around with my friends because it was so much turmoil. That, of course, as you get older, you look back and I think, well, maybe my mom and dad were that way because of something in their childhood.
Right.
I try not to think about those things, but we did not have a loving, what I call a loving home.
What about you've mentioned that there was like an age difference between you and David and your two older siblings. What kind of dynamics were there between, like, I guess it was like two separate groups here, you and David, and then your two other, what kind of relationship did you have with the two much older siblings?
Well, my sister and her husband, they eventually moved to Corpus. So they would come to Rockport. They came quite often. I wanted to be just like my sister. She was a secretary, and I don't know why. I just wanted to be like her. We had such a good relationship. I don't know if she had as good a relationship with David, because David was very, very quiet. So I got to see Marlene quite often throughout my life. I really did. And at Christmas time and stuff, her and Jean always bought us special things because because really, back then, you didn't get all the things that kids get nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, we might have gotten one or two items, and that was it. My brother, I called him Lowell. His name was Charles, and that was the same as my dad.
Uh-huh.
So we used his middle name, so I called him Lowell. Lowell, of course, went into the Army in 1957, so I would have been 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, you know what, I honestly don't remember that much of him being at home.
Wow.
Because he went out a lot when he was in high school and stuff. And then when he went into the Army, he was in he went to Germany, he went to in fact, he married a woman from Germany. So, and then when they came back to the States, they lived in Virginia and other places.
Yeah.
So I really didn't have that relationship with my oldest brother anymore. I loved him. When I find out he was coming home, I get so excited. I couldn't wait to see my big brother. I do remember that. But we just didn't really have that relationship because he was gone. Yeah.
And we should note, of course, David is missing. That's why we're talking today. And your sister Marlene, she is deceased, but your other brother Charles, is alive.
Yes.
He is. Okay. Very good.
Yeah, he's 80. He's almost 85.
Wow.
He's almost 85 years old.
Okay. Let's talk now specifically about David. Of course, you've already mentioned a little bit about reading, kind of quiet, into some science fiction. And where I probably want to go first is, and you've already mentioned this too, kind of, is that he chose to go into the military. He was not drafted in the 1960s, as many men were in the United States, of course, at the time of Vietnam. He actually chose to go into the military, correct?
He did.
Wow. What do you think went into that? Do you think he was motivated by his older brother being in the Army? What do you think was going on there?
You know, I was already away from home when he. So I really don't know, because I didn't see him I was living in Houston at the time, so I didn't get to see him at that time very much. And then when I moved back to Rockport, then he was already in the Marine Corps. You know, I really, Ed, I wish I could say, but I don't really know what motivated him.
Okay.
Because he used to tease about my brother being in the Army, being a lifer in the Army. And
yeah.
And it was kind of like, I'm in the Marine Corps. You know, who knows? He may have said, well, I'm not joining the Army like my oldest brother. Or, you know,
Okay.
I really don't know.
Oh yeah, there's that rivalry, right, in the armed forces in the United States between Army, Air Force, Marines, Navy, I guess Coast Guard too. You know, rivalries.
Okay. Yep, that's very true.
Yeah.
That's very true.
So I guess what you're saying is there's no real something going on there that he felt inspired or something. This is maybe something he just chose to do on his own. He didn't look at his brother Charles and say, I want to do that too. It was just something you believe that David came up with on his own.
Yeah, and David was patriotic. You know, we were brought up that way. I mean, we had things in school. We loved our country. And we were brought up to care about our country. You know, I do remember that. So I wish I could say for certain what motivated him, but I really don't know. I wish I'd been living at home at the time, so I could have talked to him more about those things.
Okay. Now, but though he did go into the Marines during Vietnam, the fact is, though, he never went overseas or anything. He spent all of his time in the United States, right?
That's right. That's right.
Oh.
For the 4 years that he was in the Marine Corps, he stayed in the States.
Mm-hmm. And your impression, maybe you got to speak to him, of course, after he got out or something. Do you think he liked being in the Marines? Unlike his brother, who I guess spent many, many years in the Army, he never thought that was for him going to be a lifetime career, or what do you think?
I don't think. I think he just wanted to serve his country, maybe because of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
I really don't know. I know he was proud to be a Marine. Uh,
Yeah.
I wish I could. I wish I could tell you more on
Okay.
that. I'm kind of at a standstill.
That's totally fine, Diane. I realize at the time you have your own life to live. You had your own life to live, and you didn't know he was going to go missing, or some of these things would have been more important to you. I think we all understand that, and that's totally fine. Just trying to make sure we try to get to know David as best we can. That's all.
Yeah.
What about relationships? What about any romantic relationships in his life, whether before going to the Marines, in the Marines, after the Marines? How about any of that information?
Now that I can't tell you either because like I said, I was away
Yeah.
for a while here, him being here in Rockport, and then when he came home on leave, of course, well, I don't know if we when he came home on leave, we did things together.
Okay.
In fact, my mom and dad were living in Corpus at the time, and one of the times he came home on leave and he surprised us. And he was standing out on the porch when I pulled up in my car.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. I was so happy to see him.
Huh.
And I said, and I still remember this. I said, David, because when he was growing up, you know how brother and sisters are sometimes. So I try to kiss him. He said, would you cut it out? He'd give me a hard time. And so when I asked him if I could kiss him, he said, yes. So I gave him a kiss and a big hug. And he had a motorcycle at that time. So he said, you want to go for a ride? And I said, yeah. So we were riding around in Corpus, and the roads were slick, and he had to stop at this red light, and he stopped rather quick. I guess I wasn't holding on like I should, and I ended up on one of the streets, a very busy street in Corpus. Yeah, and he got off the motorcycle and picked me in. He said, "Are you okay, Diana?" And I said, "Yeah." And so we went back home to my mother and dad's house, and it started raining, and it was I didn't even know I had burned my leg real bad, and the rain was hitting my leg. And I got there. Well, when I came off the motorcycle, I hit the exhaust.
Oh yeah.
And I had second and third degree burns on my leg, and he felt really bad.
I'm sure he did.
It's not your fault. I wasn't holding on good enough. If I had been, I would have fallen in the street. And but anyway, but I enjoyed. I was so glad that he was home. I really was.
All right.
I loved him an awful lot.
All right, but no real seeing family. Obviously close to all of you, but no romance. Once again, to your knowledge, going on there. 1960s to early 70s.
David was very, even after he went in the Marine Corps, and he would come home, and I would see him. He just wasn't. He kept to himself a lot. He wasn't very talkative. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of that stemmed from our childhood.
Yeah.
I really do.
From your father.
Because, I do.
Okay.
Because a lot of people in our family, my nephew even said, about my oldest brother, he said, Diana, he came to visit one time, he said, Diana, you're so different than my dad. And I said, well, I can't explain that. I just always wanted to, when I was growing up, I thought, when I get married, my kids are going to know I love them.
Yeah.
I probably am too sensitive. That's what my oldest brother said. I can't say anything to Diana. She cries about everything.
Okay.
But David was the wasn't like me in that respect.
Okay.
And,
What about, of course, he got out after 4 years, and we'll get into maybe the more intricacies of this in a bit. But what kind of jobs did he have after he got out of the Marines? We have to, and the way at least I have it on the timeline, he was only out of the Marines maybe for a year, a little over a year, not quite 2 years before he went missing. But during that time, what kind of work was he doing?
well, he first he tried to get, Rick and I were living in Corpus at the time, and he tried to get a job in Corpus, and he could not find anything that he was interested in, and the pay back then wasn't the greatest. Corpus has always been one of the lowest paying cities. I don't know if it is now, but it was at that time. So he moved. My mom and dad moved from Corpus in 1971. They lived in Pasadena, so my brother went up there, and the only job that I'm aware of that he had was he was working at a company called Audio Visual Aids. I know nothing about the company.
Okay.
I just know that he had made comments that it wasn't challenging at all. He was actually bored. My brother, David, I'm telling you, he made excellent grades in school. He didn't study. I mean, I always wish I was like him. I guess I had other interests when I was at, but he made excellent grades. He was very, very smart.
Okay.
So that was the only job that I'm aware of that he had. I'm sure that's the only job he had when he moved to Houston. And,
yeah. Okay. Very good. We'll come back to that in a bit. Now, just have, as the listeners know, we follow outlines for all the interviews that we do on Unfound. And so the next topic is just some issues I think that we need to talk about. And everybody should know we're doing this interview on June 7th of 2023. First, I want to talk about, he was in a motorcycle wreck that sounds very, very serious to me. When did that happen? Why did that happen? In fact, I think it happened while he was in the Marines. And did he not he didn't even let them know that it happened or something like that? Why don't you, Diana, tell the listeners about it?
That would have been, I believe, in 67 probably. I think it was right after boot camp. So it may still been, he graduated in 66. So it may have been in 66. I was living here. I had moved back from Houston to Rockport, and I was working for a doctor at the time. And David was on his motorcycle. It was close to downtown Rockport, right out of downtown. Mm-hmm. And Rockport is a small community. And he got involved. I don't know to this day what happened. I have a feeling that a car maybe had kind of sideswiped him, moved over in the lane, but it threw. Thank God, well, my brother had a helmet on at that time. Yeah. And it threw him 100 and something feet.
Oh, my.
And ambulance came. They took him out to the naval base. There's a naval base in Corpus Christi. And he had 2 skull fractures. And they did not have a specialist there. They didn't have a neurologist. So the ambulance from there went to Memorial Hospital. And David was in pretty bad shape. At the time, we weren't sure if he was going to make it. And I wish I could remember exactly how long he was in the hospital. But when he got out, he was stationed in San Diego, I believe, if I remember correctly. And he went back, and I'm trying to remember how this all happened. I don't know if his commanding officer knew that he had been in a motorcycle accident and had 2 skull fractures or what. Like I said, David kept to himself. He didn't talk about things. And some of the Marines, they were on maneuvers and going up a hill or something, and David couldn't make it. Wow. He still, it was shortly after he got out of the hospital. And a couple of the Marines, they beat him up. And then his commanding officer, I can't, stepped in, found out that they beat him up, and I don't, David didn't talk about it. I don't remember what happened to them. But it really upset me.
So this is a story that David told you or your family at some point, maybe after he got out of the Marines or maybe on one of these leaves, he told you the story?
Yeah.
Wow.
He didn't tell me directly.
Mm-hmm.
And, he would write to my mom. My dad, not so much, because, in fact, one of the times he came, I forgot to tell you this, Ed, one of the times he came home on leave, I heard my dad in his bedroom yelling. He was yelling at David. Well, David didn't want to fight him. David came through the living room and went out the front door, trying to get away from my dad, because he did not want to hit him. And my dad had already hit him. Well, then I was in the house. I looked out the window, and I saw David hit him.
Wow.
And then my dad came back in the house and started yelling, saying, for 2 cents, I'd hit him again. I said, if you hurt my brother, I'm calling the police.
Yeah.
And he knew I meant it. And then David came in and had a bloody lip. And I don't remember what I said to him. I tried to console him. And after that, when my brother went back, after he was on leave, he went back, and my brother, from then on, would not. When he wrote a letter, he wrote it to my mother.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
Yeah.
That's very sad. But getting back to this motorcycle wreck, in your opinion, 2 skull fractures, even in the 21st century, is very serious. Would you say that as best as you can tell, would you say that he fully recovered from that?
Ed, I really am not sure to this day. I don't know that much about skull. But I always wondered if later on, maybe it affected him in some way.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
I really don't.
Okay. Just something to keep in mind for later. Next point. What about, you talked about how he got out and, had this job and everything. Would you say, once again, I realize you were not following him around. You had your own life to live. And in fact, I know that the year before you had a son who was born, because he was born the same year I was born. But how would you say that he adjusted overall to civilian life?
Well, I think he adjusted well, but like you said, Rick and I were living in Corpus at the time. Robert was born in May of 1970, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, my parents were living in Rockport in 1970. They had not moved to Pasadena. Come to think of it, because Celia, a hurricane hit in 1970, and that caused a lot of damage, and I don't think that they wanted to live in Rockport anymore. But anyway,
So how did he adjust to it? We of course, here in the 21st century, hear a lot of stories about, military members, for example, getting out and they have like PTSD, hard time getting back into living a civilian life. What do you think about that for David?
Well, I don't think he had anything like that because, of course, he wasn't sent to Vietnam. He didn't go through a lot of what our service people go through when they're in wartime or whatever.
Yeah.
So I know he didn't have that. But, after he moved to Pasadena and then started working for audio-visual aids, I know that wasn't challenging enough. We didn't get to talk about it that much because my son was a baby at the time, and we just didn't have the funds to travel to Pasadena a lot, and so I didn't get to see him. And the times we went up there to visit my mom and dad, of course, she would always get in touch with him, and he would come over, like we went to a football game together, all three of us and stuff. He always wanted to be there if we were there. He didn't care much about going. I will say.
All right. Okay. And what about friends? He's back out. Did he get together with any like Marine groups or anything like that? But you've given me the impression, I even have it here in the outline, that he just was spending a lot of time by himself.
I think so, and I wish I could tell you. I have no idea whether he had friends up there. I think he was spending too much time by himself.
Okay.
I really did.
Okay. So nobody this is just an example. So no, after he went missing, guys that he was friends with, or women too, whoever, never came forward, never contacted your family to your knowledge and said, I was looking for David today, couldn't find him. Oh, he went missing. Nothing like that.
No. My mother, of course, she hadn't seen him for about 2 weeks, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. David didn't have a phone, so she went over to his apartment, and she talked to the manager there, and the manager said, I haven't seen David for about a week. Okay. And she let my mother in.
Okay, we'll get into that, Diana. We'll get into that. I'm just trying to determine, did he have any sort of social life? And one of the ways in disappearances we can figure out if a person had any social life is, did anybody come forward afterwards to say, I tried calling David today, or I tried emailing him, back here in the 21st century, and, he's not gotten back to me. What's going on? There was nothing like that.
No, not that I'm aware of. No.
Okay.
I wish.
Totally fine. Just have to ask these questions. Just try to get an idea of what was going on with David. As listeners know, I've coined the phrase, disappearances are about people, not circumstances. So we try to get to know these people as best we can. Just some questions for you. The way you remember it. Anybody in your family, anybody who knew David well, worried about him in 1971?
Well, of course, when he disappeared.
I've been worried about him beforehand. We think David's spending too much time by himself. We're afraid of this. He said this to me, and I'm a little worried by that statement. Anything like that?
Well, there was something he did say to my sister, and I didn't really think much of it because I know David. I knew David a lot better than my sister did. But he quit audio-visual aids, and Marlene asked him, David, what are you going to do now? Or what about a job?
Yeah.
And he said, I won't be needing one.
I see.
And Marlene took that as maybe he committed suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't, because David was he had a wit about him. He would say things sometimes to me just to get a reaction out of me. So I didn't take it that way. And,
okay.
I didn't want, first of all, I didn't even want to think that.
Right.
But the main thing is because he would say things to me. He even wrote to me, and he would say things that were, I'd go, oh gosh, David, just to see how I would react.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
We joked around with each other. Yeah.
Okay, so he made this statement once again. Your sister takes it one way, you take it totally different way. Maybe it has to do with how you knew David, but we can't dismiss that statement because we do know that he eventually went missing. But we're not going to get into theories or anything like that. But anytime, whether it's 1971 or 2023, somebody makes a statement like that, and then that person goes missing, you have to take some time to analyze it. Okay. When was the last time anybody in your family, somebody you trust, saw David or talked to him? Who was that person? Do you even know? Was it you? Was it your mother? Anybody who saw him or talked to him, once again, who you trust?
Well, it would have been my mother.
Okay.
It would have been my mother. And it had to be a couple weeks before he disappeared. Because she said, it was either a week or a week and a half, somewhere around there. She had not talked to David, and she was concerned, so that's when she went over to the apartment.
Okay.
And I forgot to mention this, his car he had a car.
Yeah.
His car was parked under the carport, and his motorcycle was gone.
Right. Okay, we're gonna get to that right now. So,
Okay.
so what happens is, we have a young man who is spending a lot of time on his own anyway, which, like I said, whether the disappearance is 50 years old or just a couple years old, this makes it then very difficult to try to determine what was that person doing, putting a very really concrete timeline together. Makes it very difficult. Of course, with social media and cell phones and everything, maybe it's a little easier, but still, it can still be difficult at times. So your mother is the last one who talked to him or saw him, but that was a couple weeks before this accepted disappearance date that we're going to talk about now. But so going back to your mother, was it your mother who was the first one to kind of think, you know what, I've not heard from my son in a while, and he hasn't come over to the house, and was it her or was it somebody else?
It was her.
It was her.
It was my mom.
Okay, and what happened? Then on that somebody ended up, or she ended up at his place, and what date was that?
Well, it would have been in October. We're not sure exactly the date in October.
Okay.
But it was in October. She hadn't seen him for about a week and a half or 2 weeks. I'm not quite sure about that. But it was definitely in October of 1971.
Okay. All right, so your mother goes over there, and what goes on? Of course, you were not there, but what is your understanding? What did your mother tell you?
Well, when the manager let her in, there was money, change on the table. There was a box that he had David liked to go target practicing. He always had, even when we were in high school and stuff. So the gun was gone, and there was a box of open shells. It was just like he was coming back. I mean, like I said, his car was there, but his motorcycle was gone. And my mom called me. I wish I could remember exactly. It was shortly after that she called me and told me. Well, of course, I got in the car and I drove up there at that time. And the manager let us in, and it was exactly like my mother had said. It was just like he was coming back. The only thing we could tell that was gone was the clothes on that he was wearing. I mean, everything else was like I'm coming back.
Okay, very good. When you spoke to this landlord who let your mother and then eventually both of you in, did this landlord say anything like, I saw David, or I spoke to David? Did David have the rent paid up, for example? Was he, paid up? Was he square, I guess, with the landlord? Anything like that?
No. And she just said she hadn't seen him for about a week. And she said, I was getting a little concerned, but no, he was paid up with his rent. Another thing that I just thought of, because I have it. His checkbook was on the table. Yes. And I have that checkbook.
You still have it?
I still have it.
From 1971. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you go to the apartment. Just kind of looked like a bachelor's apartment. No signs of violence. No signs that anybody else had been in there. For example, if there were like 2 glasses on the table instead of 1. Nothing that really jumped out to you.
No, there wasn't anything. And David was a very neat person, for one thing, because our mother brought us up that way. You could have eaten off the floors. I mean, that's how we were brought up. And so everything nothing was out of place.
And his car was there, but his motorcycle, he had a car and a motorcycle. That's nice. But his car was there and his motorcycle was gone.
Yeah, and if I remember, Ed, I think, if I remember correctly, the key was in the car. But you know what? I remember thinking this. Back then in 1970, 71, all that, there are times especially growing up here in Rockport, we didn't lock our doors.
Yeah.
There are times we'd leave our keys in the car. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember
Sure.
thinking that. At first, I thought it was kind of odd, but then again, I don't know. That could have been just a coincidence that he. I really don't know, but I remember that now. The keys were in the car.
Okay. Do you think? So you think that was just? I know. I realize maybe back then things are a little different. But do you think that was common for him to do that? Does anybody have any idea?
No, I don't know.
Don't know.
I wish I had the answer, but I don't.
Okay.
Because I wasn't. If I'd been around him more,
Yeah.
I could tell you more, but I just don't know.
Okay. Totally fine. So you and your mother standing there in that apartment, you're seeing that, there's really nothing strange there. He's just not there. And, he's a big motorcycle rider. That being gone's not unusual. The gun, I know people maybe be suspicious about that, but the truth is that as a concealed carry holder here in Florida, I take my gun everywhere. That doesn't mean that I'm going to shoot myself or anything, But as you two are standing there, what did you two talk about? What thoughts went through your head? What did you express to each other? Do you remember?
Well, I don't remember. I just know that know what to think.
Mm-hmm.
We just didn't know what to think at the time.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Did you start thinking, well, he could be here, he could be there, he maybe decided to do kind of a Peter Fonda, Jack Nicholson motorcycle trip across the United States? That was a big thing. Easy Rider was a big thing back then. Something like that, or what?
Well, and I did think maybe he went somewhere on his motorcycle. He took his gun with him to go target practicing. We both thought of that. Because like I said, we used to do that here in Rockport, outside where the high school is. It was completely different back then in the 60s, where you could go target practicing. And so David and I did that quite often with my brother-in-law, Marlene's husband. We would go out there together. So I know David absolutely loved his motorcycle. He loved riding on his motorcycle. Mm-hmm. So maybe he took his gun and he rode out somewhere. Right. At that time we just didn't know.
Okay. Were you maybe thinking, being that you had been in this, you knew that he had this accident while he was in the Marines. You knew, of course, you were on the motorcycle with him when we had this kind of very small accident. Did you think about, well, maybe he's in a hospital, gotten another motorcycle wreck? Did you call the hospitals or frankly call the local jails, anything like that?
Well, no, and the only thing I can tell you, my mom called the Pasadena Police.
Okay.
Right away. She did do that and told them he was missing. And of course, I wasn't there when she made that phone call. I wish I had been around my mom more, because she just wasn't able to do a lot of it,
Yeah.
I'm more outspoken. She was very quiet. I wish I could have been there to help her deal with that.
Yeah.
But I wasn't. And she got the detective. He is probably 10 years ago or more. But he was on David's case. Very, very nice person. He was on David's case for years.
Okay, and we're going to get into... Yeah, we the listeners will shortly know that we haven't heard the last of this motorcycle and some things. So the police were alerted. They took your statements, did the paperwork, I guess. And so the original handling of this is through Pasadena, Texas.
Yes.
And is that still the police department that's responsible for his disappearance to this day?
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
Because, okay.
Yeah, there's another detective that took up, and I can give you his name, that after David Moulton passed away, another detective took up David's case. I don't know if there's anybody working on it to this day right now, Ed.
Okay.
You know, that's something, yeah.
Right. If I can ask, and I realize that husband-wife conversations are privileged and the law and everything, but can you remember talks you were having with your husband? I guess his name is Rick. Can you remember talks you were having with him? You go over there that day. David's not around. Eventually you go home. Your husband's there. Of course, you have your children. You just had a son the previous year. Can you remember some of the conversations you had with your husband about all this? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I remember some. We were both trying to figure out what happened to my brother. Mm-hmm. At the time, there was something else. There was something going on. Let me think. It was either 70 or 71. There was a lot of young boys, teenagers, killed. There was a man named Coral and two teenage boys that were working with him named Henley and Brooks. And those teenagers would bring other young boys to his house. And he lived in that area where my brother lived and where my mother and dad lived. And they were killed. They were tortured. I read the book about it. It was awful.
Okay.
Well, but there were a few that I think were in their early 20s. And in fact, Coral, I think he was in his 30s at the time. He rode a motorcycle too. So when Detective David Mullican came over to my mother shortly after David disappeared, then he asked my mother questions about maybe David could have been one of the people killed by Coral and Brooks and Henley.
Wow. So they eventually, though, being that we know these people's names, they eventually got caught somehow.
Oh, yes, they did.
Okay.
Yes. Brooks and Henley are in prison, and Coral was shot. I think he was going to end up killing Henley, if I remember correctly. And Henley shot him and killed him.
Wow.
But Brooks and Henley, as far as I know, they're still in prison.
Okay.
But it was awful what they did. They buried bodies in a boat barn in that area and other places. So that's what the thinking was.
So that was one of the conversations, as you can remember, you had with your husband.
Yeah. Yes. Wow. And then Rick would tell me, Diana, because my mom and dad, I think my dad thought, well, maybe he just left. He just got tired of it and just left.
Sure.
And Rick said, Diana, I don't think David would not do that and not get in touch with you. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He has said that for almost 52 years. So, our minds were going everywhere.
Sure.
And then I thought, at the time, hearing about those killings, why would David's motorcycle be out in the woods?
Yeah, we'll get into it. We don't want to jump ahead here. We're just gonna follow things. We're gonna get to that. We'll edit some of this out, but that's fine. We're gonna follow the outline, and we're gonna get to that in just a moment. But I do want to ask you about this. Of course, before I ever do any interviews and in the process of preparing, I go to newspapers.com as an example, and look up what were people writing about this disappearance at the time. It doesn't matter if the disappearance is 1971 or 83 or 2002 or whenever else. I try to go back and see what people were saying and how it was reported on at the time. And there really weren't any articles written about David's disappearance back at that time. Any particular reason that you can think of regarding that?
Well, and I contacted many agencies. The only thing I can tell you, Ed, is they just were not that interested because David was 23 years old.
I see.
If it had been a child, a young person, but when someone's an adult, I think they think right away, well, they just wanted to leave and they left on their own.
Yeah.
You know, that was my impression of talking to different agencies and stuff. They just didn't put much emphasis if you were an adult. They do a lot better nowadays. But then again, the police departments didn't then have a lot of people working on missing people's.
No.
Their concentration was more on other things.
Yeah.
Crime.
That's still true to this day, unfortunately.
It is.
All right, so you tried to get some news out there. Doesn't seem like local media was interested, like you stated. He's 23. He's a Marine. He can surely handle himself. He's on his motorcycle. You know, he's a grown adult. Maybe he drove off to San Francisco or something.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's very common. All right, let's move on to this. Now, this is the rest of the investigation, the rest of the disappearance, however we want to put it. Now, we should know David is still missing here in 2023, but his motorcycle was found. Now, we're going to talk about the story that's on the record as far as how it was found, but we'll come back to this a little bit later. But for the record, the most popular story to this point, how was his motorcycle found? Where was it found? Was David familiar with this area? What can you remember about that?
Okay. David's motorcycle was found off of Highway 59, and I was told in the woods, just where if you were driving down 59, you would not be able to see it. And we were told by Sheriff Parker, and I met him.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one that took us out there. He said that a hunter came across David's motorcycle. And the helmet was sitting on it, the key was in the motorcycle. And I remember asking him, well, did you search the area? Oh, we searched it for a couple hours. Well, Ed, it is so thick there that you could search it for days.
Okay.
So, and plus, you know, we took his word for everything he told us. I
Right.
mean, that's what we were. It was near Cold Springs. The Sheriff Parker was the sheriff for San Jacinto County.
All right, and how far, I have been to Texas many times, but not familiar with this area. Most people are not. How far would you say it is from where David was living to where his motorcycle was found? You can just give it like in minutes. How far to drive that?
Oh, well, and I can tell you it was 50 to 60 miles.
Oh, was it?
Northeast, yeah,
Okay.
of Houston. Uh-huh.
Okay, so not close. So when you say Route 59...
About an hour, probably an hour.
All right, so not close to where he lived.
No.
Okay. And this motorcycle, you know, you were brought to the spot where it was allegedly found. We'll come back to why I'm saying that. But was this like far off the main road? Did it look like the motorcycle was hidden? I mean, you've been there. I've not been there. So how would you describe it?
I know. Well, you know, of course, the motorcycle, they had moved it and everything. So he just showed us the spot where, and it wasn't back in the woods very far. Like I said, it was just back far enough where if you were in a car driving down, you would not have seen it because of the trees. You would not.
Okay.
But it really wasn't back. It wasn't back very far in the woods.
Okay. And I don't have this in my notes, but something in my mind is popping up. It was like in some kind of recreational area or a state park or something like that.
You know what? I think that, if I'm not mistaken, Ed, that's the Sam Houston National Forest.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken.
Very good. I think you're right.
Yeah.
That's right. So right there, right on the edge, if not in the Sam Houston National Park area.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, and I realize you had your own life to live back then, but was this an area where David usually went? Did your mother, your other sister, your brother, any friends, Marine buddies ever say, you know what, we knew David to go up there and do some shooting, ride his motorcycle, whatever?
No, we did not. No. I wasn't familiar with that area at all. And of course, my brother and sister, they wouldn't have known. They didn't. They did not. They did not. My brother didn't keep in touch. In fact, he said very little over the last 50, almost 52 years. He doesn't even mention my brother David.
Okay.
And my sister, I was always the one normally that brought it up. Because,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I understand that's very common. I don't want you to feel guilty about that. That's very common. All right. So really what we're saying is his motorcycle's found up an hour away, and really the people who knew David the best really cannot say, you know what, this is very common. He would go up there all the time.
No, we just had no idea.
Okay, very good. Now, of course, the sheriff spoke about searches, but why don't you describe the area again? Of course, when you got there, the motorcycle had already been moved. But, describe the area. It's kind of a forest, very thick, hard to walk through.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You would have to search it really good. You'd have to be in that area probably a couple days. It was so thick. You couldn't even hardly walk through there. Yes. Mm-hmm. Very, very thick. With all kinds of trees, brush, you name it. Mm-hmm. And when he said a couple hours, I thought that would even cover a very big area.
Yeah. Right. Just with a couple people, a couple hours is nothing. I mean, if it's a couple hours and you have 30 people out there, that's different. But if it's just a couple people walking around for a couple hours, that's not going to be a lot of area covered. Now, I should ask you regarding this motorcycle, the way you, was the motorcycle eventually given back to you, the family? What do you know what happened to it?
Yeah, it was. It was given back to my mom and dad.
Was it?
And they sold it.
Did they?
Yeah, they sold
okay.
It.
Is it your understanding that the motorcycle had gas in it? Was it in running condition?
That I can't answer that.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Okay. And so he had his helmet there. Was any money left behind? A wallet left on just his helmet?
The helmet was on the motorcycle. The key was in it, and there was no gun, no nothing other than the helmet and the key.
Okay. And this hunter who found it, we should state for the record, you still have no idea. If this is the actual story, you have no idea who this person was who came across.
I have no idea.
Okay. So once this all happened, once again, going back to your family as much as you wanted to talk about it, what was the thinking? The bike's out there, the motorcycle's out there, David's not around. I mean, what are you thinking at that time, especially considering he wasn't known to be in that area? What was some of the thinking in 1971?
Well, I will tell you. I mean, because Marlene seemed to think suicide. I mean, everything went through our mind. I mean,
Sure.
It really did. We thought maybe he would have committed suicide, but then I thought, why? There's no reason for him to have done that,
Yeah.
And then we thought that he just decided he wanted to get away from everybody.
Yeah.
It was just hard. It was hard to know, and then I will tell you then what was going on with the young people being killed, the teenagers and stuff.
Sure.
I mean, that even went through our mind too. Then I go, well, why would his motorcycle be that far away from all that happened? So, and that didn't make sense. It's just all kinds of things went through our mind, and they still do to this day.
Of course. All right, so we have this motorcycle. We talk a lot about vehicles being left places for disappearances. This might be our first motorcycle, though. I'd have to think about it a little more, but still a vehicle that people can use to get from place to place. It's left there, and of course it's ominous that David and his gun are missing, but on the other hand, we have to remember that if he did walk off, it's been over 50 years. It does seem like there's hunting in that area and everything, and nobody's ever come across any remains or anything. So we maybe can counter one idea with the other. And now I want to move on to this. You told me about the Salvation Army, which is one of, I have to say, especially coming from that organization, has to be one of the most horrible comments that I think we've had from an organization like that on Unfound, almost 300 disappearances. What exactly happened with the Salvation Army? What year was this? How did this all transpire?
I think I contacted, I believe, the Salvation Army in 1971 or 72. I contacted them early, along with the Texas Rangers and stuff like that. This would have been, and I have a notebook. I should have looked that up. I have a notebook full of things, letters and stuff that I've written and tried to make notes of stuff. I'm trying to remember. I would say it was in the late 70s. My mom and Dad were still living in Pasadena. They moved from Pasadena to Corpus later on. My mom called me and told me that she got a letter from the Salvation Army, and it said that David was alive. And I don't think it gave any more details. And then my mother called, and it was his name was Wyatt, and he was in Dallas with the Salvation Army. And he said that David was alive, but he did not want to get in touch with any of us. And my mom was just devastated.
I bet.
She believed it. And I said, well, Mom, I'm not going to believe it. I need proof. I'm going to have proof. Somebody's not going to say David's alive without any proof. So I called up there, and he told me the same thing. And I told him, I said, well, I need some proof. And I told him, I said, one way I'd know if my brother is alive, is you get in touch with him and ask him what he used to call my mother when he was a kid. And that never happened. He never called me, but he said, Miss Sherbet, I can assure you, your brother is alive. And then years later, I even called back up there, and it was a different person because Wyatt had retired. In fact, I think he moved to Florida, if I'm not mistaken, Ed. And he said, we have no record of that. I said, what? You have no record of David being alive? And he says, no. And so years later, and Ed, I wish I could tell you when this was.
Okay.
I tracked down Wyatt. I tracked him down, and he was elderly then. And this had to be 20 years ago, maybe longer. And I said, I don't know if you remember, my brother's name was David Waggoner. Do you remember you telling us that he was alive? And he said, well, I'm not sure, and then I told him, you said that he was alive and he didn't want to get in touch with any of us. He said, I can assure you, if I told you that, that was the truth. That's what he told me, Ed. And I just did not believe that.
So you have two people at the same organization, same location, same position, different years later, and two of them have two totally different stories about David.
Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right. And that's especially when Rick said, Diana, there is no way that if your brother was alive, that he wouldn't have gotten in touch with you. He said he may not have gotten in touch with your mom and dad, but he would have gotten in touch with you. Rick has always said that.
So when you got to talk to this, so when you spoke to this Wyatt guy, when you say you tracked him down, you were speaking to him face to face?
No, I mean it was on the phone.
On the phone, okay.
It was on the phone.
Okay.
Yep.
So I guess what we're saying is here that if he's saying this, did David offer him an identification? I mean, how could this guy even, if we're even supposed to believe this? I'm not sure if I believe it or not. It'd be up to the listeners. But did this David Waggoner ever offer ID? or anything like that. And we have to remember this, he's saying this is several years later. This wasn't in 71 or 72. This was like late 70s when he said this happened.
Right. He would not give me any information at all other than David was alive. That's all he would tell me. He said he couldn't because there's a confidentiality between a missing person and the Salvation Army.
There is certainly not. There is certainly not, Mr. Wyatt, whatever his name is. There is certainly not. Because if there was privilege, he shouldn't have been talking about it at all.
Yeah, that's what he told me. He couldn't share that information to prove that my brother was alive. Now, if he, like I said, if he had asked him, what did you use to call your mother when you were a kid? And if he had told me that, then I would have believed it. Yeah. I would have believed it. Because no one knows that except probably me.
Yeah.
Because I'm the one that was growing up with David, and I heard him call my mother a certain thing, you know? So, yeah.
When you talked to this other Salvation Army person who said that, yeah, we have no record of that, did he ever give you an impression of the kind of reputation that this white guy had? Was he prone to saying things that may or may not be true with no proof of them? Did he have a prickly reputation, anything like that?
No, he did not give me any indication of that. I was shocked when he said he didn't have any record of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I was shocked.
Okay. All right, that'll be something. I mean, we certainly want to believe that David was still alive, at least in the late 1970s, but would certainly like more proof than just from one guy who says, well, you know, just trust me.
Yeah.
Okay. That's I despise that when people say things like that and don't ever offer anything to back it up. Okay.
I know. It's pretty heartless to me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and it happens all the time, even once again up into the present, happens. All right, now we're gonna go. Maybe surprisingly, maybe not. At least not to you and me, it's not surprising. Maybe to the listeners, it's going to be surprising. We're gonna go back to that sheriff of San Jacinto. Is it you're gonna have to Jacinto or Jacinto? San Jacinto. Me being a stupid Floridian. All right. Sheriff of San Jacinto County in Texas. I think there's San Jacinto counties in other states, but of course we're talking about the one in Texas. This is where David's motorcycle was found. And I should maybe ask you this. Is it your impression that that his motorcycle was found around that October 9th, 10th of 1971 time frame, or what? I guess what I'm asking you is the way you think about it now, was the bike discovered first or the motorcycle discovered first, or did you and your mother notice that David was missing first? Do you know, can you put that in the timeline in which order?
Oh, we discovered he was missing. Mm-hmm. And then she reported it to the Pasadena Police Department.
Okay.
Then it was about 2 weeks after that, Ed, if I remember correctly, that's when we found out that, and I don't know how this all happened, how it transpired, but that's when we found out that David's motorcycle was found. We don't know if San Jacinto, if the sheriff, someone called the Pasadena Police Department, I don't know how all that happened. Okay. I don't know how the connection was made. And so, there's so many things. My mom just didn't ask questions. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm not holding it against her, even to this day. Nobody expects this is going to happen to them, so when you're confronted with it, it's hard to be knowledgeable in the moment.
It is.
It is.
You just don't know what to do or what to think.
Right. Okay, so we're not sure if, being that it was 2 weeks later, it seems that the motorcycle was found after you two noticed that David was missing, but it very well could be that he was missing and the motorcycle was found right away, and then you figured out that, something wasn't right. We're just not sure about that. Okay. Let's now go back and maybe this is going to seem like a strange direction to go at this point, but I can assure you it's not for all the listeners. We're going to go back and talk a little bit about the sheriff of San Jacinto County, James Humpy Parker. And I want to ask you this. Back in 1971, of course, we've already spoken about him a bit, how he said that the motorcycle was found in a particular location, everything. What were your interactions like with him back at that time?
Well, the only interaction that I had, I don't know about my mother and my dad. They probably had more interaction with him when they went to get the motorcycle. But the only interaction I had was there in the woods. We met him on Highway 59, and he walked us back to where the motorcycle had been, told us a hunter had come across the motorcycle. You know, like I had said, it was just back off of the highway, just enough in the woods where you couldn't see it if you were driving down Highway 59. And
but
he really didn't have a whole lot to say.
Okay.
Other than, you know, I asked him if they had searched, and he said for a couple hours, which I didn't think at all that would cover, but very much territory. You know, I wish I could remember more of what he said. I don't think he said very much. I think I would remember that.
Okay.
Because I remember so many details back there in 71, but I do not remember much of anything else that he said. Yeah.
All right, and we have to remember something, that officially David's the paperwork for his disappearance is not in San Jacinto County. It's in the county where Pasadena, Texas is, right?
As far as I know. Now, that's another thing. I don't know if anything is in San Jacinto County. I called, and I don't know if you want to go there. I had called at one time years later.
Okay.
And I told him who I was, that my brother had disappeared in that area in 1971. And by the way, this was after they found out about Sheriff Parker.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that. But what was said when you called?
I said, I wondered if you have any record of David disappearing in that county, and she said no. And I said, well, I understand, you know, Sheriff Parker was sentenced to prison. And right away she said, I can assure you, he did not do anything to your brother. Well, that right there told me that they had a very protective stance for Sheriff Parker. I mean, because she reacted pretty angrily.
Okay.
And I said, well, I didn't say Sheriff Parker had anything to do with my brother's disappearance. I just want to find out if you'll have any record. She said, no, we don't. Now, whether she was telling the truth, I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Okay, I guess what we're saying is that on NAMUS, for example, you can find David's name, but it's not in San Jacinto County. It's down in the county where Pasadena, Texas is. But so we just have to keep in mind that even though David's motorcycle was found in San Jacinto County, it's actually Pasadena, Texas, whatever county that is, where the paperwork is.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
But for those 1970s, as far as you can remember, just in the 1970s, what was the reputation of Sheriff Parker?
Well, I thought it was a good. He had a good reputation because little did I know, I didn't know anything about him really.
Okay.
I had never heard anything negative about him until 1983.
All right, now let's move up to that. So you have this sheriff who is in the area. His story is that some hunter came to him and said, this is where the motorcycle was. Your mother and you show up. He shows you where the motorcycle was. But we're just going on this sheriff and a hunter who is still unnamed. So what then happened in the early 1980s that I'm guessing changed everybody's opinion on Sheriff Parker. What happened?
Well, I found out about Sheriff Parker, and it was 1983. Rick and I were living in Bay City at the time, and we got the Houston Chronicle paper. And on the front page, I believe, was a story about Sheriff Parker being sentenced to prison. I think it was for 10 years. I can't even tell you what I thought then.
Yeah.
It did not sit well with me at all. And that's when then I started thinking that maybe he did something to David, him and his deputies. Because not only were one of his sons was a deputy. His name is Gary. And he was involved. And they were stopping people at random. I read the book, Terror on Highway 59. I didn't know a whole lot about it until I read that book. They were stopping people at random, and it even said in the book, especially people that were riding motorcycles. And they would try to get money out of them. They were involved in drugs. I understood they even waterboarded some people that they stopped. It was scary to think that maybe they stopped David.
Can you remember how this all came about? I mean, I guess the inference is that they had been doing this for quite a while, going back to the 1970s, maybe even going back to the time that David disappeared. But do you remember how they actually ended up getting caught? Any
That's
ideas?
what I understand. And I think, remember I told you about Greg McGee?
Mm-hmm.
You had looked it up about Greg McGee. You sent me a picture and everything.
Yes.
And he's a judge. And
Right.
He had been,
Right.
I think he joined the sheriff's department I believe in the early 70s, but I know he joined after David disappeared. He was not in the sheriff's department then. So what I gather is when he got a job with the sheriff's department, they must have been still doing things to people, and he saw it. I think he's the one, the squealer, I guess you would call him, that got in touch with, that guy, Steve Sellers.
The report. He was a reporter at the time. Yes.
Yeah, in Austin, with the Austin American Statesman. I think that's how the truth, everything came out then. And I think it was Greg McGee. I know Greg McGee, and somewhere I read it that the FBI had interviewed Greg McGee. I may be wrong,
Right.
but I did a lot of investigating myself.
Yeah.
Trying to get, to the bottom of it. And then, of course, the book really, it makes you wonder. There's things in there. I remember one of the paragraphs.
I think we have to set this up, Diana, about this book. Okay. So what happens is this Greg McGee guy, who is now a judge, who actually has his own Facebook page for being a judge. He's still around. He is still a judge. But back in the 70s, he became a deputy, kind of figured out what was going on here. He became a whistleblower, and that is how Sheriff Parker and his own son and others got in trouble. The allegation is that they were doing things to, you can find stories, they were doing actually things to inmates, to torturing them, trying to get information about other crimes out there. But what eventually happened was they got caught. The Steve Sellers, who was a reporter, reported on it, and then he wrote a book about it.
Yes, he did.
Right? And it was called Terror on Highway 59, and that is the book you're talking about, Stephen Sellers' book. Okay.
Yes.
And in that book, it details what they were doing. It's not a fiction book. It's a fact book.
It is a fact book. That's right.
Okay. And so this is the same. Just to kind of put this all together for everybody. This sheriff, who is responsible for San Jacinto County in the early 1970s, was doing these things, and so you put that together with David going missing and his motorcycle found with its helmet just on the side of the road or out in the woods near the route Highway 59. in the same area what this book is written about.
Right.
Okay, and this is why earlier in this interview, when I kept saying allegedly the story of how the motorcycle was found, this is why I kept saying the word allegedly, because the information that Diana and her mother and everybody else, where they were getting from, was a sheriff who was eventually proven to have been harassing motorists, harassing motorcyclists, extorting people, and things like that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I should ask you though, is David's name ever mentioned in that book, Terror on Highway 59?
No,
it's not. Okay. Any reason why that might be? I know you've gotten to speak to Steve Sellers. Was he not aware of David, or what?
He was not aware, because when I talked to Steve Sellers, this was sometime, this was in the 80s. When I found out about Sheriff Parker, it was in the 80s when I tracked down Steve Sellers. And he was not aware of David. He had no knowledge.
Okay, and I've not read this book. I don't think it's in print anymore. But were there any victims' names used in that book? Or maybe he just changed their names to protect them or something. But were anybody's names used in that could be victims?
You know what? I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I've read the book. I really need to reread it.
Yeah.
To see. I don't remember anybody's names. But there were comments in the book about if you don't cooperate, they would tell different people that they arrested. If you don't cooperate, you're going to end up in Lake Livingston like the rest of them.
Huh. Is Lake Livingston near where the motorcycle was found?
Yeah. Well, it's in that area.
It is.
It's in that. I'd have to look at a map, but I'm sure it's very close in that area of the Sam Houston National Forest. I'm pretty sure about that. But I haven't really looked at a map to see. I need to do that.
Okay.
But I do remember reading that, and it did not give me a good feeling at all.
Okay. To your knowledge, being that the paperwork was filed for David's missing persons case in Pasadena, Texas, do you know if any of the investigators ever went up there and talked to the convicted ex-sheriff and asked him about David, or ask any of these deputies, any of these guys who ended up going to jail? Do you know if they ever they were asked about David?
I'm not aware of that, and I will tell you, Ed, I wanted to. I wanted to go see Sheriff Parker, but Rick talked me out of it.
Your husband?
Yes, my husband.
He did? Why do you think he did that?
Well, I think he was afraid that it would just be heartbreaking. He didn't think that Sheriff Parker would tell me anything, and it would be more heartbreaking for me.
I see.
I think that's what was in his mind.
Right.
But I wanted to. It really bothered me.
Right. And what would you really expect? I mean, of course, is he really going to say, you know what? Yeah, me and my deputies, we hurt David on that day. I mean, was he really going to say that? Probably not.
Probably not. Probably not.
Okay.
I mean, how many people that do things? I don't know. I don't have that experience with people that commit those kind of crimes and stuff to know if they would ever tell the truth.
Yeah. Now, listeners should know that book, Terror on Highway 59, was actually turned into I think maybe a TV movie, but it was called Terror on Highway 91.
Oh, 91.
Is the name of the movie? Yes, Ricky Schroeder, or Rick Schroeder, now that he is known, now that he's all grown up. Okay, so we have this book, Terror on Highway 59, that was turned into Terror on Highway 91. Like I said, I don't know why they changed the number on that, but this book is about that sheriff who was the one who was a party to the finding of David's motorcycle in October of 1971. Unfortunately, the sheriff is no longer with us, correct?
No, In fact, I think they let him, and don't quote me, but I think they let him out of prison early. He had brain cancer.
Oh, my.
He died of brain cancer.
Okay.
I think maybe one or two other deputies are not living any longer. His son, I told you, Gary, has been in and out of prison.
Yes.
I read somewhere where his son had kidnapped a woman. No telling what he's done over the years. I don't know how many people are still alive, but, like I've mentioned, Greg McGee, don't know if you want me to go into it, but I called him at least a half a dozen times and told the receptionist why I was calling. I said, I just want to talk to him. I know he doesn't have anything to do with my brother's disappearance. And then he never answered my phone calls. So then I wrote him letters. He never answered my letter.
Have you tried, of course I found that Facebook page. Have you tried writing messages to the Facebook page?
No.
I haven't tried that. Yeah, you might want to try that.
Okay.
You probably want to try that and see if, at least with that, you can see if the messages are actually being seen or not through Messenger.
Right.
So I would try that. I don't know, even if you get to talk to him, I don't know what he's going to be able to say, if he knows anything, but yes, he should be returning your messages.
Well, I was just hoping that he, I just wanted to ask him, and I told him in the letter, I just want to know if you ever heard David Wayne Waggoner's name mentioned while you were working with the Sheriff's Department. That's all I want to know. I know you had nothing to do with David's disappearance, but and he never, and I have this, I thought, how can someone be that cold?
Right.
It's just beyond me.
Right. What have, of course, your parents are no longer around, correct?
No.
Diana?
No.
When did your father die? When did your mother die?
My father died in, it's awful, in 87. My mother died in 1991.
Okay.
My dad was the same age I am. He was 76, and my mom died when she was 78.
Wow. Okay.
The only time I ever saw my dad cry was a couple years after David disappeared. And we were in Pasadena, and he started crying.
Okay, so that's the only time that you saw your father cry.
Show any emotion. I mean, and I will tell you, and of course my dad died of a second heart attack. And the first heart attack, I went to see him in Corpus. They were living in Corpus at the time. I told my dad that I loved him. When I saw him laying there, they didn't know if he was going to live. I told him that I loved him, and he started crying and said, I don't know how anyone can love me with all the things I've done to you kids.
Wow.
And I will tell you, Ed, I forgave him. I forgave him when he said that. And for a year, he was a completely different person. I can't explain it. I consider it a gift from God. I really do. And I wish my brother and my sister had been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
But anyway, I just, he had regrets. It's a shame you waste most of your life and don't tell people how you feel and try to change how you treat people. But and I know that had an effect on David because all four of us were treated pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Now I think at one point you said that your other brother Charles, he never mentions David at all. You two get together. No. David is a non-topic and has been for the last 50 years.
Yeah, my brother just, you know what I think? He doesn't talk about the past. He doesn't talk about anything. I try to ask him questions about our family.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even talk that much. His wife, we talk, not him. He just really he's kind of like David was. He just keeps stuff inside, and I think it's too painful sometimes to talk about the past.
Oh.
Yeah. Sad.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about, of course, your sister Marlene is now deceased. What year did she die? And, did you and she... 2018.
Yep.
Right. And so did you two talk about David over the years?
Very seldom. I brought him up all the time, but she didn't. If I brought his name up, she would talk about it, but other than that, she never brought him up. It's just that they just didn't have the relationship that David and I had. I mean, really. Like I said, growing up here in Rockport, it was much smaller than it is now. We did everything together. We went to the beach together. We rode our bicycles. If somebody picked on my brother, they had to pick on me too.
Huh.
Yeah, I felt very protective of David because he was so quiet.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, it bothered me.
Yeah.
It really did.
So, for you personally, what has the last 50 years been like?
Well, I can tell you, Ed, there's not a day that goes by I don't think about my brother.
Mm-hmm.
And I prayed and prayed and prayed. I don't know how many prayers. And there were times I got kind of bitter because I think,
Yeah.
my God, why? Just let me know what happened to my brother. And I would get bitter, but then I would think, well, there must be some reason that my prayers aren't answered. I don't know what they are, but maybe it would be so painful to find out the truth. I don't know. I honestly don't think there's anything that could be that painful because of the thoughts I've had for almost 52 years. And I feel so bad for families that have gone through this. Before it happened to me, I would hear about missing people, but didn't really think about it that much.
Mm-hmm.
And then it happened to our family. And it is, a lot of people say, well, if you find out what happens, it'll be closure. It'll never be closure.
No.
I don't think you can use the word closure. I don't think that there'll ever be a closure, even if I found out what happened to him. And I know this sounds strange, but I told my family, my kids, that when I passed away, I wanted a picture of David at the service, and I want something said for David. I didn't want to have any type of service for him because I don't know if he's dead. Reality probably tells me he is, but I don't know. I don't want to give up hope. And I keep sharing things on Facebook about David.
Yeah.
And every time I see a missing person, I share that because I know what that family's going through. I just wish that there were more people, that cared like you do, Ed.
Well, thanks.
I mean, really. I'm so thankful that you got in touch with me. It may lead to nowhere, but then again, it may lead somewhere. But at least somebody's helping,
Yeah.
For years I didn't have internet. We didn't have internet. We didn't have the way to communicate like we do now, you know. And I hope one day, if you ever are in Texas and down this area, you will come by and we'll take you out to lunch or dinner. I would love to meet you.
Well, I don't pass up lunches and dinners, so that's going to happen one of these days.
I hope so.
Well, you're very kind. I do agree with you that unfortunately, like a lot of things probably in life, let's just not pick out disappearances. That people don't take a concern in things until it affects them personally, like cancer.
Until it happens.
Cancer people, aren't concerned about it until their wife or child or they themselves get it, and then they suddenly go on the internet and become cancer experts. That's just it's just kind of human nature. Unfortunately, dare I say.
I know. It almost has to happen.
Yeah.
I lost my mother to cancer. She got lung cancer. Yeah. She was a smoker. She started smoking when she was in her 30s, and she got lung cancer.
Wow.
And we were in Victoria, and she was in Corpus. I would go pick her up. She stayed with us while she would go through her treatment. She'd start feeling better and want to go home for a little while to check on everything. I'd take her home, and then I'd pick her up again for another treatment and stuff. And it's terrible to see. She went from she was 77 when she was diagnosed. She was a woman that she'd be climbing up on ladders, doing everything you could. She was not a typical 77-year-old. And when she died a year later, she was like a 100-year-old.
Wow.
It's a terrible thing to see people going through that. But you're right. Unless you go through it, you don't really understand.
Yep.
What it's like.
That's just the way human nature is sometimes.
It is.
Yeah.
I know. It's sad. It really is.
Mm. Do you have a Facebook page? I know that you do because that's how we first came in contact with each other, because of me and the work that I do. When I'm not producing a podcast, I'm looking for people to reach out to. Why don't you tell the listeners about your Facebook page right now for David's disappearance?
Okay. Well, David's Facebook page is David Wayne Waggoner. Missing. Is, I believe, how I have it set up.
Okay. And you are the administrator there. You run it?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
Very good.
And you wouldn't believe, several times, people have messaged me, not like you. They don't have a podcast. They weren't able to help.
No.
But then they gave me some suggestions. Maybe try this. Or they just say, Diana, I'm so sorry about your brother.
Yeah.
And even those things just really touched my heart.
Yeah.
A perfect stranger, you know.
Yeah. You need that. It's important. It's important, for sure.
It is. It is.
Diana, do you have any final words before we complete this interview?
No, I just want to tell you, I feel like I know you, and I'm so thankful that you contacted me. I don't know how to put it in words to express the thankfulness I feel.
You're very welcome.
That you do this and you care.
You're very welcome.
And I do hope to meet you one day. And
yeah.
I'm not kidding you. I told Rick, I said, I hope to meet you. Yes, I told him that today.
I haven't, last time I was in Texas, it was 2019, but I was up in the Amarillo area. One of my assistants, CHARLEY, who's been with me since like 2018, a volunteer, she lives like kind of near Corpus Christi area, down that way.
We're 30 minutes away from Corpus.
Oh, okay.
Yes, we're
Okay,
right there we're on the coast. We have a beautiful beach. Everybody has discovered Rockville. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm not kidding you.
And I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ed. Thank you. And I hope we'll keep in touch, okay?
We will. We surely will. And you're very welcome.
I consider you a friend.
Yeah, of course. And you too. Thank you. Thank you for being on this episode of Unfound.
Oh, yes. Wonderful. You have a wonderful day.
You too.
And that was my June 7th, 2023 interview with Diana Sherbet, sister of David Waggoner. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. For this next part, I want to talk about the San Jacinto disappearance statistics. I mentioned this, if you will remember,
back in the summary section at the beginning of this episode. And to do this, I'm not going to be reading from a script. I'm just going to be talking off the top of my head, kind of. I have a few notes in front of me, so if this sounds a little different than how I usually do a regular episode, then please understand this is more like how I do the update episodes or the Q&A episodes. And the reason I'm doing this way is because it would have just taken a lot of time to type it all out, because I need to talk to you about my process first and then finally get to what I discovered regarding these disappearance statistics regarding San Jacinto County in Texas. Of course, that is where David's motorcycle was found, but remember, the actual paperwork regarding his disappearance is in a totally different county, in the county where he lived in Pasadena, Texas. Just keep that in mind. So, my process. When I come across disappearances like this one, where, of course, it's very, very old, we're going back over 50 years, and the guest, in this case, Diana, is telling me about how there's a corrupt sheriff or something was going on at the time, or maybe a guest says, well, there were a lot of people going missing around that time. These are the types of points that I just don't take for granted. What I've found after almost 7 years is sometimes people get a little bit of an exaggerated notion regarding this. They will say a lot of people were missing around this time, but then when you go to, for example, newspapers.com, and you go to around that time and looking for disappearances in that area, you don't find any. Or you go to NAMUS, and really the only the disappearance you're covering for that episode of Unfound is really the only one in that area within a few years. So people's perceptions of disappearances, as many things in life, can become distorted over time. So that is something that always catches my eye or catches my ear when a future guest tells me where a lot of people were going missing around that time. There were a lot of murders happening around that time. Well, I want to go check that for myself. Of course, why? Well, this disappearance that I'm covering, the disappearance of John Smith, might be connected to these other ones. And that's something I think that I need to look into. And if it seems plausible, it needs to be passed on to all of you. So when Diana told me about Sheriff Parker and his deputies, as I posted coming up to this episode coming out on June 16th of 2023, I posted an article about it is true. Yes, he did get in trouble. He did go to jail. His deputies did go to jail. His son did go to jail for a variety of crimes, all of them horrible, especially considering they are in law enforcement. And yes, there was a movie made out of this. It seems like it went from a reporter's story, and somehow the reporter ended up writing a screenplay, turned into a TV movie. I've never seen the movie. I don't know how good it is. I have no idea. But it came out in about 1989. And so that was certainly going on. Now, I will tell you, on the other hand, though, that I could not find any information stating that any of the charges against Sheriff Parker in their trial in 1983 had anything to do with disappearances or murders. So that's one part of this. And the other part, the second part is, yes, Dean Corll was certainly a bad guy. I've posted. He even has his own Wikipedia page. I mean, the number of young men, boys that he and his partners, accomplices killed is astonishing. And dare I say it, it seems like it's something that's kind of forgotten out there. We know about, of course, the Atlanta murders with all those black boys who went missing, who were murdered. That guy, and of course, some people believe maybe he didn't do it, but we all know about those Atlanta murders and whatever that guy's name is. Whereas Dean Corll there in Texas in the 1970s, it seems like a lot of people have forgotten about it. It's just my perception. But yes, he was in that area at the time, and I looked that up. I posted just one or two of many, 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 many articles written about all of those killings at the time, early 70s in Texas, in that general area of where David went missing, the Houston area around there. Certainly happened. Horrible. Horrible. Now, I will tell you that my opinion is that David doesn't seem to fit into the demographic of the victims of Dean Corll and his accomplices. My general opinion, in addition to the fact that it seems like David had a gun with him and he was a Marine, but you can decide that for yourself. And like I said, there is a Wikipedia page for Dean Corll that all of you should go and read about it, especially if you had no idea that this even was going on and happened in the 1970s. But this does take me to the San Jacinto disappearance stats on NAMUS. And I have to tell you, I was a little shocked. And so, like I said, my process is going back to how this section started. When somebody tells me, well, it very well may be my brother, my sister, my child was part of a serial killer spree or something like that, that's something I'm going to check out. So I simply went to NAMUS and checked out the disappearance statistics, or anybody missing in San Jacinto County. How many people are on there? How, what do the records say? And I understand that NAMUS is not a complete record. We know that. Not just for San Jacinto County, not just for Texas, but for any state in the union. In fact, there's a disappearance that just got solved here. The guy was from Pinellas County, where I live. It was just solved, and I posted in the discussion group. And he's not on NAMUS. He's not on the CHARLEY Project at all. I've never heard of him. His last name was Gilchrist. So I went to San Jacinto County for Texas on NAMUS. And here's what I found. There's not one disappearance listed for San Jacinto County before 2003. Now keep in mind, the county in Texas has been around. I went to Wikipedia for this as well. The county has been around since 1870. So allegedly, that adds up to 133 years for all of you business majors. So allegedly, there were 0 unsolved disappearances for 133 years in San Jacinto County, and they just happened to have their first one in 2003 that is now still unsolved 20 years later. That really, really, really challenges my imagination. Okay, so there are, and you should know, there are 4 that are listed there right now, but the oldest one is only in 2003. Now, if you want some statistics on San Jacinto County, it has a population of 27,000. Now, at the time of David's disappearance, it was 16,000. In fact, every county in Texas, the population has gone way up since the 1970s. So that really caught my eye. Now, I realized that, well, Sheriff Humpy Parker, if he is making people disappear, then surely he's not going to do paperwork on that. Of course, but he wasn't sheriff. He was sheriff until like the early 1980s. What about from like 1981 until 2003? It doesn't seem like any sheriff or deputy since then did any paperwork, or at least now in the 21st century, whoever's in charge as the sheriff in San Jacinto County has not submitted surely existing disappearances from San Jacinto County from like the 1980s, 1990s, 80s, 70s, and going back. That's what it seems like to me. Now, some contrast, I went and looked at counties around San Jacinto. So other Texas counties that touch San Jacinto. And what I found out is maybe this isn't as odd as I think. Maybe there wasn't something underhanded or whatever going on. So I went to Trinity County. They only have one unsolved disappearance on NAMUS. And guess what year it's from? 2022. I went to Polk County. It also only has one unsolved disappearance in its existence. All these counties go back to the 1800s. One unsolved disappearance in Polk County. And that is from 2015. I went to Walker County, once again in Texas. 2 unsolved disappearances are listed on NAMUS. And the oldest one, I guess this is a little better. The oldest one is 1991. I was shocked. So, originally, I was shocked that San Jacinto only has 4 missing persons cases that are unsolved, and the oldest one is only in 2003. But then I went to these other counties connected to it, and it's not much different. So I thought, all right, well, I'm going to do research on 2 counties that I know very, very well. The county in which I live in now, which is Pinellas County, and which is where St. Petersburg, Florida is, Clearwater Beach, Clearwater, Florida is. That is not where Tampa is. Tampa, the city, is in Hillsborough County. But Pinellas County, it came to be in 1912. Now, granted, Pinellas has a population that's much higher than any of those counties in Texas that I just named. Pinellas has, at least here in 2023, has a population of almost 1 million people. But it got started in 1912. There are 469 unsolved disappearances listed on NAMUS for Pinellas County. Not unusual given the population here. But you know what? The oldest one goes back to 1974. Quite a contrast. So I looked at something else. I went to another county that I know pretty well, and that's the county that I grew up in, Armstrong County in Pennsylvania. It is kind of a little northeast of Pittsburgh. It actually, in many ways, is very similar to those counties I'm talking about in Texas with a lower population, kind of rural. The county seat for Armstrong County is Katanning. And it used to be kind of a steel mill type of area in the 1900s, basically until like the 1960s, 70s when steel mills in western Pennsylvania started to go away. And I saw that myself, of course, living there, growing up there, and going to Leechburg High School. But Armstrong County has been around since 1800. You have to remember, Pennsylvania is one of the oldest states. It has a population of 65,000 people. And guess what? Just like those Texas counties, allegedly, Armstrong County in Pennsylvania only has one unsolved disappearance listed on NAMUS. And it's from 1986. And coincidentally, I know about this disappearance. I can remember when it happened because I lived in Armstrong County at that time in 1996. And the guy's last name is Chrisman, which is a very common last name in Armstrong County. In fact, when I worked at the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation for those 3 summers in college, I worked with guys whose last name were Chrisman, but I don't think it was any of none of them were the guy who ended up going missing. But I have to tell you, it stretches my imagination that Armstrong County, since its existence, starting in 1800, that it only has one unsolved disappearance. And so it's horrible. I've written in my notes, it's horrible. It's kind of in line with San Jacinto. So what does this all mean, and what does it have to do with David's disappearance? What it means in general is in 2023, we have no reliable information on what was going on in San Jacinto County in the 1970s. Since I do not believe the disappearance statistics are accurate, then we must all believe all sorts of other stats on the county are off as well. What this then means for David's disappearance specifically, and I am not telling you what to think. But given what information can be collected right now at this point, there is nothing to rule out the idea that Sheriff Parker and the deputies could conceivably have harmed David in early October of 1971. I would think differently if the missing persons reports for San Jacinto County from the 1970s to now were accurate. But being that I don't believe they are, then anything is possible regarding David's disappearance. All I can say for sure is at some point, his ride became uneasy. If you'd like to hear and read my further in-depth analysis of David Waggoner's disappearance, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast and start reading the Unfound blog. It's only $2 a month. Until then, I leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.